In this video, I will cover the hubbub surrounding the recent news story in which it was reported that the United States and Israel are in contact with the Galactic Federation, which comprises various alien species, reportedly. On December 9th, 2020, this story dropped in the Israeli newspaper Yediot Aharonot, in which journalist Renan Shaked interviewed former Israeli space security chief Haim Eshed. Subsequent to that, this story went absolutely viral and was carried on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Forbes magazine, Vice, TMZ, and other outlets. One of the reasons this story went viral is because of Haim Eshed's credentials and accomplishments. Here are what they are to the best of my knowledge. He's a retired brigadier general in the Israeli forces, former director of the space program for the Israeli Ministry of Defense for 29 years. He was an officer in the Israeli Military Intelligence Service, serving in a very secret unit designated as Unit 81 for the Defense Forces. He received the Israeli Defense Prize 3 times, the nature of which is classified because it deals with national security. He was, and maybe still is, a professor at the Asher Space Research Institute. He holds a bachelor's degree in electronics and engineering, a master's and doctorate in aeronautical engineering, and has been described within Israeli media as the father of the Israeli satellite program. Before we go any further, I want to share some quotes cited by Jeremy Corbell that were spoken to the journalist Renan Shaked, who interviewed the former Israeli space security chief Haim Eshed. Corbell asked Renan if these quotes accurately depict what Haim Eshed said during the interview. Here they are. The UFOs asked not to advertise that they are here. Humanity is not ready yet. Trump was on the verge of finding out that the aliens and the Galactic Federation say, wait, let the spirits calm down. They don't want us to have mass hysteria. They want to make us sane and understanding first. They waited until today for humanity to evolve and reach a stage where we will understand what space and spaceships are. He said there is an agreement between the U.S. government and the aliens. He said they signed a contract with us to experiment here. They are also investigating and trying to understand the rule of the universe, and they want us as helpers. There is a ground base on Mars, and that's where the representatives and our American astronauts are too. If I came up with what I was saying 5 years ago today, I would have been hospitalized. Every place that until today I went to the academy with this, they said the guy has lost his mind. Today we are already talking differently. I have nothing to lose. I received my degrees and awards. After Corbell relayed these quotes to journalist Renan Shaked, he asks, did he, that is, Haim Eshed, say those things to you during your interview with him, or is this just a bad translation? Here is how Renan Shaked responded to that question. He said all these things, maybe with the exception of the agreement between the U.S. government and UFOs. He was referring to the Eisenhower thing, and he quoted his granddaughter Jackie Eisenhower's daughter, who said her grandfather told her there was such an agreement. He's quoting her. And all the other stuff you've quoted was right on the nose. So in other words, at the very minimum, to the best of my understanding, the stuff about the U.S. government making an agreement with the Galactic Federation was not something that Haim Eshed was saying is factual. Instead, he was merely citing a part of ufological lore consisting of Eisenhower's great-granddaughter, Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, affirming that an agreement between ETs and President Eisenhower took place. In Corbell's interview with Renan Shaked, he asked Renan a vital question regarding former Israeli space program director Haim Eshed. Someone of that military stature, that political stature, is he speaking from what he has read and deduced, or is he speaking from personal experience where he's engaged other scientists? Journalist Renan Shaked responds, my impression was that, yeah, he was a very, as I've said, well-educated about the existing media and other publications. But he also said a couple of times that he was speaking to his colleagues either at various academic institutions and at NASA, and that he heard stuff from them that he can't quote directly or repeat or publicize yet, but he has also learned stuff from his connections with people who investigate the subject and not only the media. What I'm not clear on regarding the quotes of Eshed that I cited earlier is how many of them can be attributed to him speaking with his colleagues and gaining inside knowledge from them, and how many can be attributed to stuff he has read in the open domain about UFOs. When I mentioned this sentiment on Twitter, this is what Jeremy Corbell had to tell me about his interview with journalist Renan Shaked. Also, the point is not what Professor Eshed said. It's more about the intentional disregard of context by mass media to delegitimize the study of the UFO presence. My interview serves to illuminate how media lazily cherry-picked incendiary statements without attribution or context. To further add to the confusion, at one point in the interview, journalist Renan Shaked states regarding Haim Eshed. One good thing about him is that everything he's kind of documented. He has documents for everything that he claims, and he offered again and again to show me various articles and documents and videos and what have you. And he has this really big library of his research from the last decade or so. I got the impression that he was very much convinced himself, and not only that he is also convinced that he has the evidence. He kept saying that the mainstream academy will not cooperate on that. He wasn't able to get their cooperation or consent, but still he said that at this point in his career, he earned his awards or his credentials, and he doesn't need to be that cautious anymore, and that's why he wants to come out with it. On December 9th, Luis Elizondo was asked about this news story on the Exopolitic YouTube channel. Here is one sentiment he had.
You know, my background coming from the intelligence world is extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? And these are very bold claims. And I'm not certainly one to throw rocks at anybody, because 3 years ago when I came out with my claims about the program and ATIP and whatnot, people probably reacted very similar, like, what the heck is going on?
Elizondo goes on to convey.
I wouldn't want to diminish his claims saying that, you know, this is not real. But you need to have some evidence. Just like us with ATIP, we had to have videos, we had to have Senator Reid, we had to have documentations and memorandums, official memorandums being released to the public that they could see for themselves and say, yeah, this is a legitimate effort and this is real. I think that's where we're at right now. I think a lot of people are ready to believe, but we collectively need to see more evidence. If someone wants us to take that leap of faith, then I think we need to have the empirical data to back up those claims and those statements.
I think what Elizondo says in these two clips is of extreme importance, because it really makes a huge distinction between Luis Elizondo and Professor Haim Eshed. Now, we can't deny that Professor Haim Eshed reached extraordinarily high levels within the Israeli government. I mean, he was known as the father of satellites for his country. That's pretty extraordinary. But that alone does not give credibility to what he says. It cannot justify belief, in my opinion, on account of no evidence being attributed to what he says. Whereas with Elizondo, we do have evidence attributed to what he says. For example, Elizondo didn't just reach high levels of the U.S. government. He was working for ATIP, which we know factually that it studied UFOs. And it didn't study drones, it didn't study missiles, it didn't study interesting technology believed to be from China or Russia. It studied technology that is of unknown origin and has flight characteristics well beyond anything we know of residing in any military inventory in the world. Elizondo has documents and memorandums to back up what he says. Witness testimony, for example, from the Nimitz event and so forth. So they're two completely different animals. Beyond that, the media ran wild with some of the quotes that Professor Haim Eshed stated. And we know that based upon Renan Shaked's statements, that when Professor Haim Eshed was talking about the Galactic Federation, he wasn't saying that it's factual or that there's an agreement between the Galactic Federation and the U.S. and Israeli government, but that within the ufological lore, some people have believed that. It's very ambiguous to me, out of all the quotes that Professor Chaim Eshed stated how many of them he actually believes are factual and how many of them are just being attributed to ufological lore. I really don't know. It's a bit confusing because Renan Shaked did state that some of the things he said he believed and that they were based upon his own research. But again, his own research cannot be on the same level as if he got inside information. On the other hand, journalist Renan Shaked did say that some of his perspectives on UFOs can be attributed to his colleagues and inside information. So it's just very confusing at this point. The one takeaway that I can say we can all have with relative confidence is that the whole Galactic Federation being in contact with the Israeli and United States government, that is not something that Professor Chaim Eshed believes. That was merely him citing ufological lore. All this talk of the reported claims of Professor Chaim Eshed leads me to want to talk about former Defense Minister of Canada, Paul Hellyer, because I think there are some very real parallels here. My friend Finn Hanley tipped me off to a recent podcast that Alejandro Rojas did. And Alejandro Rojas stated that he was around when Paul Hellyer first started coming out and talking about UFOs. And Rojas was present at a dinner with Paul Hellyer, and according to Rojas, there were UFO community friends present at that dinner, and they were feeding Paul Hellyer really bad information, unreliable information, mythological information. And the reason this is pertinent is because in 2010, Alejandro Rojas did a podcast with Paul Hellyer, October 2010. And you can go and look at that podcast if you like. It's in the public record. And Alejandro Rojas asked Paul Hellyer the following question. Well, how do you know this information? What information did you come across when you were the Minister of Defense? And then Rojas goes on to say, guess how much information he told me he came across as the Minister of Defense? You're exactly right. Big fat goose egg. He said I was too busy, I wasn't interested in the topic, nothing of this topic can I recall ever came across my desk. So Rojas goes on to explain that after this he asks Paul Hellyer, so why do you believe this stuff now? To which Paul Hellyer explained that he read the book the day after Roswell, that he spoke with a friend that he says is a general in the United States, and that general said there's something to this topic. And furthermore, he spoke with researchers that are not known to be very rigorous and are more on the speculative side, and they fed Hellyer with information about UFOs. So to say this all in one sentence, basically Hellyer's belief in UFOs has nothing to do with his experience working in the Canadian government. And I'm not trying to throw shade on Hellyer, but I think there is a very real misconception that some people seem to subscribe to, which is that he learned about UFOs during his official tenure for the Canadian government. That's simply not the reality of the situation. So I think what puts Lou Elizondo in a completely different league than former Defense Minister Paul Hellyer and even Professor Chaim Eshed is that we have absolute clarity that Lou Elizondo learned about UFOs while working for the government in an official capacity. In other words, he learned from the evidence that came across his desk while working for the U.S. government about UFOs, whereas Paul Hellyer learned nothing about UFOs during his tenure for the Canadian government. And what Chaim Eshed learned while working for the Israeli government is simply not clear. Now, I want to go into some October 4th, 2020 tweets made by Lou Elizondo. These are absolutely profound tweets, and I've shared them before, but they're so spectacular that I think it's absolutely incumbent upon me to share them again. Elizondo made these series of tweets after he saw the movie by director James Fox, The Phenomenon. And I don't consider Elizondo a fantasist. I don't think he's prone to fantasy. I think he's a true statesman and a rationalist. But that's just my opinion. Anyways, here are the tweets he made after he saw the movie The Phenomenon. Folks, I am normally silent and careful not to endorse products, even if I support them. However, I am making an exception in this case. Although not part of the production, the movie by James Fox, Phenomenon, is the one worth watching. It says things I can't. It's accurate. It's verified and it's real. I know this because while at the Pentagon, we had the files. Yes, many of you will already know some of the information, but not all of it. Literally thousands of files have yet to be released that only bolster this production. Once they are, you will realize just how on the mark this movie is. Knowing now what it takes to make a quality production, I am amazed by the access that was gained by the producers and the director. Something tells me this is only the beginning. Bravo, Mr. Fox and Dan. For the record, I had absolutely nothing to do with this production. There is nothing in it for me. This is why I feel I can honestly endorse this effort. I am a neutral party. In fact, my role as ATIP director is almost unnoticed. This story pertains to all of us, in my humble opinion. Elizondo has gone on record that while he was the director of ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, he actually refrained from reading books on the subject. I think he said he didn't want to prejudice the jury. He didn't want any preconceived notions that could influence how he interprets the evidence that actually went across his desk while he was working for ATIP. And I will tell you this, Mr. Elizondo has been adamant. He has stated in no uncertain terms that when he was working for ATIP, him and his colleagues came to the conclusion that these vehicles do not originate from any military inventory in the world. I think that's significant. And I've said it before, and I will obnoxiously say it again. It is my impression that there are people within the Department of Defense that have clarity that we're not alone in the universe. That there are vehicles that are detected through very advanced sensors, not just electro-optical, that being video, but radar, sonar, and sensors that are probably highly classified that we don't even know the name of that have detected these machines. And they poured over this evidence over a very long period of time, and they are highly confident, if not certain, that we're not alone in the universe. Now, I need to caution. I've never said I'm 100% that we are not alone, but I am over 50%. I'm also well over 50% that the DoD knows a lot more about this presence than they're willing to admit at this time. At one point during the earlier interview that I shared with you with Luis Elizondo on the Exopolitik YouTube channel, Elizondo was asked, during your tenure as the director of ATIP, were you ever made aware of an agreement with space aliens in the US government? And Elizondo stated that he's heard rumors of this every now and then, but has never been privy to this kind of information on an official basis, or he seems to suggest that he has no reason to believe such an agreement has ever been established. Now that, of course, was to the best of Elizondo's knowledge, but I want to share with you a perspective from Victor Marchetti from an article that was published in May of 1979 titled, How the CIA Views the UFO Phenomenon. Victor Marchetti was an analyst at the National Security Agency before joining the CIA in 1955. Here's an excerpt from Marchetti's article in which he addresses the question of whether or not he thinks that an alien intelligence has been in contact with the United States government. There were, however, rumors at high levels of the CIA, rumors of unexplained sightings by qualified observers, of strange signals being received by the National Security Agency, the U.S. government's electronic intercept and communications intelligence collector, and even of little gray men whose ships had crashed or had been shot down being kept on ice by the Air Force at FTD, Foreign Technology Division at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. And there was the odd case of the lady from Maine who, while in a hypnotic trance, had allegedly communicated with the starship. Most of these rumors I found to be unimpressive, except for the strange signals from outer space being received by NSA. Perhaps that was because I had once been an NSA officer, or perhaps it was because I had frequent contact with that agency while serving with the CIA, and the little I learned of the signals was treated with extreme caution even by signal intelligence standards. The last contemplation I want to leave you with is addressing the question why we believe in UFOs. Well, the reason we believe in UFOs is because there's extraordinary evidence of their existence, at least in my opinion. But a lot of the claims made about UFOs, there's not extraordinary evidence to back up those claims. In fact, the evidence for a lot of the claims made about UFOs pales in comparison to the evidence we have that UFOs exist. And so I would ask you, my audience, to always keep this in mind when claims are made about UFOs. Please don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you in the next episode.